We have with us today Brendan Ballou, former federal prosecutor and founder of the Public Integrity Project. He is, for 2 years, he prosecuted the rioters who attacked the Capitol on January 6th. He previously served as special counsel for private equity in the Justice Department's antitrust division. You know, that's a special
Jam.
interest of mine. Let's start. Let's welcome Brendan to the show, and then we have so many questions for him.
Hey, thank you for having me.
Oh my God, we're so excited that you're
Really
here. You know, I'm going to do everything in my power not to ask you a million questions about private equity.
Go for it. Yeah.
But we're really excited about your new project, the Public Integrity Project. It's this group that you founded to pursue legal action against the private sectors accused of bribing officials inside the Trump administration. So, first of all, I just got to say, what cases do we have on the docket?
Yeah. Well, I have to be a little circumspect because they aren't filed yet, but I can talk about
Okay,
sort of at a high level what we're looking at. So
perfect.
there are really two categories of cases. So one are the people outside of government that are trying to bribe people inside of government. And then the other class is the reverse of that. So if you look at the folks outside of government, you can look at organizations like various Trump campaign committees where people and companies gave hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars. And then a few months later, they got their government investigations dropped or their
Mhm.
civil litigations dropped, or in some extreme cases, their criminal prosecutions dropped entirely, which is essentially unprecedented. And so, these are actions that ordinarily the Department of Justice would be looking at. But obviously, DOJ is not in the business of going after rich criminals right now. The infrastructure for going after white collar criminals is being decimated. The very office that would investigate that sort of thing, the public integrity section, allegedly has just 5 lawyers left. So we're
Wow.
looking at what are the civil causes of action that can be used to go after these people, these companies, these campaign organizations. And then the flip side is the sort of corruption that you're seeing from within the government itself. You're seeing these flagrant abuses of the law. For instance, the Trump administration authorizing a sale of TikTok's US assets to a coalition of administration allies like Oracle that have every incentive to censor the content that this administration doesn't want on it. So we've got a lot on our plate. We are, less than 2 months old, but we've got a lot that we need to get done.
That's exciting. I have to ask, I'm sure you've seen it, but there's a new banner on the Department of
I
Justice.
was just thinking this. Yeah.
It's just a picture of Trump. And Rebecca and I were talking about it yesterday, and she was like, "Don't you think that's illegal?" And I was like, "I mean, at this point, everything kind of feels a little illegal." But like, is that like from do you know if that's allowed?
Whether or not it's illegal, it's certainly counterproductive, even for like the Trump administration itself. So, one thing that I think the Trump folks don't quite understand is that the Department of Justice benefits from the reality and the perception of its own independence, but so
Mhm.
does the White House. So, part of what, not part of, the entirety of what the Department of Justice does is to try to convince judges and juries to believe things. The only tool that it has is its credibility. And so
Mhm.
the more that the Department of Justice is seen as a political tool of the White House going after disfavored defendants and political opponents, it's actually going to be harder for it to do its job. That's why we're seeing it lose so many cases in court. That's why we're seeing cases get kicked at the grand jury stage, which is extraordinarily rare. And so to your point about this banner, I think it's obviously just enormously disheartening. It's disgusting, but it's also counterproductive because it's a literal sign that the Department of Justice is controlled by one man, which is the president. And that's actually going to make it harder for them to do their work, even if I don't support that work.
Yeah. One of the first cases that you're talking about on your website is the inauguration committee. Um, there's people like Meta, Google, Micro, like all of our biggest companies have effectively donated to that committee. Can you talk a little bit about like what that committee does, where that money went, like the idea of a slush fund?
Yeah. So inaugural committees are pretty shady just by their nature. So, you could people and companies can make unlimited donations to these inaugural committees that nominally, pay for the expenses of the inauguration, but the leftovers can be used to go to, for instance, the President Trump's presidential library, where we don't know how the money's going to get spent. And so people and companies gave over $200 million to Trump's second inaugural committee, which is twice as much as the previous record, which was set by Donald Trump in his first inauguration, which I think was about twice as much as the guy before him. So, it's a way for people and companies to give just an extraordinary amount of money, to the president or people near him. And then, I'm not alleging a criminal action here. I'm just describing the sequence of events. Shortly after at least 18 people and companies gave money to the inaugural committee, either their government investigations were dropped, their civil cases, so cases brought by like the Securities and Exchange Commission or the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau or the Department of Justice, their criminal cases were dropped. And in one case, one wealthy donor or somebody whose company gave to the inaugural committee, not only was his criminal case dropped, but the line prosecutor, like the career nonpartisan prosecutor on the case, was personally fired by a White House official, which I think really speaks to just how invested this administration is in making sure that certain people or certain kinds of people don't get prosecuted.
That's so interesting.
It's a little depressing. Sorry, guys.
Like it does feel like this like web of money and power, which we're seeing play out in the Epstein files too. Like, I guess unsurprising.
Yeah, and the Epstein files is actually something that we've been doing just a little bit of research on. The administration seems to be pretty blatantly non-compliant with the law here. It was supposed to produce all the files within 30 days. They didn't come close to that. They were supposed to explain their redactions. It's not clear that they did that correctly. They weren't supposed to release identifying information from victims. They released over a dozen photos, nude photos of young women or girls. And as relevant here, there are various times where the Trump administration produced one or more files referencing Donald Trump and then retracted that production. And so it seems like in a world where DOJ facially isn't in compliance with the law, one thing that would be really interesting would be if an independent journalist brought suit under what's called the Administrative Procedure Act, explaining, look, the government's not complying with the law here. It doesn't seem like they're particularly interested in complying with the law here. We need judicial oversight to make sure that the documents that are supposed to be released actually get released.
Well, I'm going to play, I'd call it devil's advocate, but really these are the friends I meet in my TikTok comments. These are 6394253. So when we look at past presidencies like Obama or Biden, do we see this same sort of pattern? Like, what was Biden's inauguration fund like? Where did that money go? I've never even heard of Biden having an inauguration fund, but I'm assuming one existed.
Yeah. So, yes, he did have an inaugural fund. I may be misremembering the numbers, but I think it was on the order of $50 million raised and so forth. I completely agree, frankly, with a lot of what I imagine are your commenters in TikTok, which is there's an enormous amount of corruption in America that is not limited to Donald Trump and the people around him. And I think what's particularly concerning is a lot of that corruption is entirely legal now. Citizens United really has profoundly transformed how American democracy works. And it's really hard to go after those sorts of things. And I think once we get beyond the present moment, like we need to bring the same energy that hopefully we're going to bring to sort of these blatant violations of the law, to some of the more structural economic things that have gotten us to our present moment. That said, I would push back against those commenters a little bit in that I think what we are seeing in the present moment is qualitatively different from what we saw in previous administrations. Previous administrations, and again, I don't like this, except, politicians accept money for access, for, powerful interests to be heard. What you really did not have was past presidents or most past elected officials getting personally enriched through this corruption. And so, you really didn't have an example like you have with President Trump, where a UAE investment firm buys $2 billion of his cryptocurrency that enriches his company and his family. You don't have an instance where a foreign government personally donates a private, a luxury jet to the president's, personal library. This is a sort of personal enrichment that I think is relatively new in, our, generation in American history. And it's really similar to what you've seen in Italy, in Hungary, in Turkey. And so I think it's important for folks to recognize both that there is broader corruption, but that what we are seeing in this current moment is truly unique.
Can we talk about the ballroom for a second? I'm really curious because suddenly, okay, so Trump overnight demolishes the East Wing and is suddenly like, oops, sorry, we are actually going to have a giant ballroom. And then I've seen the number go up and up and up about how much that ballroom is going to cost. Here it is. It's going to be huge, apparently. Now he says it's going to cost $400 million. And all I keep hearing is the American taxpayer will not be paying for it, which, like, great. So then who is?
Yeah, they keep announcing various corporations and rich people that are, donors to the ballroom. I mean, I think it's extraordinarily distasteful and it's potentially illegal. I think it's important for all those companies that are considering donations to remember that the statute of limitations on most federal crimes is 5 years, and this administration's only got 3 years left. So, if some of these constitute the kind of quid pro quo bribery that would be a criminal offense, these folks are creating enormous exposure for themselves. We've just started thinking about sort of what's the civil side that can be used to approach this. And sorry, just for your viewers and your listeners, criminal laws enforced by the government, it's the kinds of violations that you can go to prison for. Civil laws enforced by both the government and private parties, and those are situations where you can't send somebody to prison, but you can get money and you can prevent them from doing the thing that violates the law in the future. So looking at like what the civil causes of action are here, I mean, we're looking at statutes like the False Claims Act, and are there ways that this really looks like the kind of influence peddling that some of these older statutes are meant to tackle? But it's going to be, it's going to be really interesting because bluntly, our laws really didn't anticipate this level of what I'll call broadly corruption, whether or not it constitutes a criminal offense. Our laws really just didn't imagine that you would have a president that would do something like this. And so it's going to require a fair amount of originality to pursue these sorts of cases.
Can I ask a question? It's a little specific, but let's say somebody donates to the ballroom as an individual, right? But they head up a big company, and then a big thing goes away or changes or goes in favor of their big company. Is there any way potentially to prosecute that? Or do they just say, I can't help, I'm just a big fan of the ballroom personally.
Like, I just really believe we need a ballroom. That's what
yes, exactly. Huge ballroom. So, it's a great question. And the standard lawyer answer is it depends. I used the phrase quid pro quo earlier. What you need, unfortunately, our federal white collar law has really been whittled down in a lot of ways by the Supreme Court, so that you really need to show a very explicit quid pro quo, the idea that I am donating this money with the understanding that both of us have that we're going to get some sort of private benefit as a result. I don't think it would matter particularly if the money comes from, the company or the executive at the company, so long as there's an agreement.
Okay, great. I'm going to be submitting cases all day. No, I'm just kidding. I'm kidding. I'm not going to flood your. No. One of the things that I just wanted to ask you about, and I know this was kind of the past part of your career, but you prosecuted the rioters of January 6th. And we have been so grateful to have Michael Fanone on this show and get to know him a little bit. And I guess like one thing I just, want people to know from your perspective, like what don't we know about January 6th as the American public?
It's a great question. And I should say, I was a very small part of a very large team. There were a ton of people who were vastly more involved in the project than I was, but I did get to be involved for a couple of years. So, I think, unfortunately, a lot of what we don't know was in some of the, well, I should say the broader sort of criminal violations by Donald Trump. We don't know because, one of the key reports is being withheld by Judge Eileen Cannon in the Southern District of Florida. I'd say, the bigger picture question is what was the involvement of high ranking government officials, both in the executive branch and within Congress? There was a huge controversy around, subpoenas for the phone records of various members of Congress.
Sure.
Jack Smith, sort of explained, look, these were people that were getting phone calls from the president that day. We had an obligation to understand what was going on. And so it's obviously just enormously, not just unfortunate, but tragic that, we didn't get the public airing that would have come through a trial. I think it would have been, good for sort of the cause of justice, and for democracy more broadly to have this information come out through a courtroom setting rather than piecemeal just through, the media and various leaks.
Do you think
Yeah.
we'll see more?
See more of what?
Just like, do you think that there will be like another sort of, it feels like in a lot of ways that everything that's come out about January 6th, like they're like, we're done, right? Like that's how it seems, I think, to
Rewrote it on the website, on the
Right.
White House website. They were like, actually, it didn't even happen if you think about it,
I think if there's a new administration in there, we could see sort of like, I really feel for Michael Fanone, for Harry Dunn. These folks they have not gotten what they deserve. Michael Fanone does not have the support that he has. He doesn't have the benefits that he has. Like, do you think that there is a time where these folks will get to sit down and really see them, get justice be served?
I can't speak to sort of the positive side of things. Maybe I can flip it and just talk about the negative, just because I believe that whether or not there are going to be lawsuits or, in the future, I do believe that the history that January 6th is going to remain very much alive in America, because Donald Trump needs people to either forget that moment or to condone that moment. Because if he's successful in that, then he's going to be able to get people to buy off on any attack on democracy. And so I think fighting over the history of January 6th is going to be very much a part of our American politics for a long time to come.
Okay. I actually think that could be a positive. Brendan,
I think
don't you think so?
No, well, not just that. I think just yesterday, the former South Korean president was arrested and put in life imprisonment for fomenting an insurrection. And I saw this and I was like, wow, this looks familiar. And yet, look at how that went down. So I agree. I think this is important.
Brendan, where can we, our friends, find you?
If you're looking to support the Public Integrity Project, just go to publicintegrityproject.com. We, would love to have you join the listserv, suggest cases, contribute to the cause. If you want to find me, I'm on Blue Sky and Instagram, and probably not using either platform as often as I should be, but you guys can teach me how to do that stuff.
And wrote a great op-ed in the New York Times this week.
Yes, check that out too.
Yeah. Thank you so much for coming by. We got to have you back. We got more. I got a lot more questions.
Thank you for having me. Take care.
Thank you, Brendan.
Bye.